It is the tallest mountain on Earth, a frozen graveyard for those who dare to challenge it. But in 1924, two men set out to do the impossible, to conquer Mount Everest at a time when no one had ever stood on its summit, and then they vanished. For 75 years, their fate remained a mystery. No one knew whether they had reached the summit before perishing, or if Everest had claimed them before their dream was realized. Then, in 1999, a discovery sent shockwaves through the mountaineering world. High in the death zone, nearly 8,200 meters above sea level, a frozen body was found, perfectly preserved by ice and time. It was George Mallory. But his body raised more questions than answers. Was he coming down from the summit when he died? Or had he never reached it at all? And what of the missing camera, the key to unlocking this century-old mystery? If it is ever found, it could rewrite the history of Everest forever. This is the story of George Mallory, the man who may have conquered Everest first, and the mountain that refused to give up its secrets. To understand the fatal climb of George Mallory, we must first understand the man himself and the dream that consumed him. Born in 1886 in Moberly, England, George Mallory was no ordinary man. From a young age, he was drawn to the idea of adventure, of pushing beyond human limits. He excelled in academics, but his true passion lay elsewhere, in the mountains. By the time he reached Cambridge University, he had already made a name for himself as a fearless climber. Scaling the cliffs of the Alps and the peaks of Wales, he sought the ultimate challenge, and he found it in a mountain that no human had ever conquered, Mount Everest. At 8,848 meters, Everest is the highest point on Earth, a place where the air is so thin the human body begins to die the moment it enters the death zone. But to Mallory, Everest was more than just a mountain. It was the greatest test of human endurance, a riddle that no one had yet solved. The British Empire saw Everest as a prize, proof that British climbers could accomplish what no one else had. And so, in 1921, Mallory was invited to join the first reconnaissance expedition to Everest. They mapped the treacherous terrain, searching for a route to the top, but the brutal conditions forced them back. In 1922, they tried again, this time reaching a record height of 8,225 meters before disaster struck. An avalanche killed 7 porters, forcing the team to retreat once more. The mountain had claimed its first lives, but George Mallory was undeterred. To him, failure was not the end. It was only fuel for another attempt. In 1924, he was given one final chance. The stakes had never been higher. Everest had humbled the strongest men before him, but this time, Mallory would not turn back. As he bid farewell to his wife and 3 children, he knew there was a chance he would never return. When asked why he was so determined to climb Everest, Mallory gave a simple, legendary response: because it's there. On June 6, 1924, George Mallory and Andrew Irvine began their final ascent. No modern equipment, no weather forecasts, no rescue teams. Only their willpower against the deadliest mountain on Earth. To understand what they faced, you must first understand Everest itself. Towering at 8,848 meters, it is the highest and most merciless place on Earth. The air is so thin, it carries only 1/3 the oxygen found at sea level. At this altitude, the human body is dying every second, cell by cell. Today, climbers rely on oxygen tanks, lightweight gear, and insulated clothing. But in 1924, there were no such luxuries. Mallory and Irvine wore heavy woolen coats, leather boots with hobnail soles, and carried primitive oxygen canisters, bulky, unreliable, and prone to malfunction. At just 22 years old, Andrew Irvine was a brilliant engineer, recruited for his ability to maintain the expedition's fragile oxygen tanks. Mallory, seasoned and battle-hardened, had faith in him. Together, they were the final hope of the 1924 British expedition. For weeks, the expedition had battled Everest's fury, blizzards, freezing winds, thin air that made every step feel like lifting a mountain. But on June 6, 1924, the weather cleared, and with it, one last chance. At 12:50 p.m. on June 8th, as the clouds briefly parted, fellow climber Noel Odell spotted two figures high on the ridge, moving toward the summit, and then they disappeared. We don't know what happened next. Did they reach the summit, or did Everest claim them before they could? What we do know is this: by nightfall, they had not returned, and in the days that followed, hope faded. Everest had swallowed them whole. On June 8, 1924, at 12:50 p.m., Noel Odell watched two small figures moving toward the summit of Everest, and then they were gone, swallowed by the storm, swallowed by history. From the moment Odell lost sight of them, history enters a void. No one knows for sure what happened next. But there are clues, tiny fragments of evidence that have sparked nearly a century of debate. Their known path took them along the northeast ridge, a treacherous, exposed knife edge of rock and ice. If they had reached the second step, they would have faced the final great obstacle before the summit, a nearly vertical 30-foot rock wall. Today, climbers use ladders installed decades later, but in 1924, Mallory and Irvine would have faced this wall with nothing but their bare hands and crude equipment. Could they have climbed it? Some believe Mallory, with his unmatched skill, might have found a way. Others argue that without modern aids, it was impossible. What we do know is this: by late afternoon, a violent storm rolled in. Winds reached over 100 kilometers per hour. Visibility dropped to zero. The temperature plummeted to minus 30 degrees Celsius. If they were still alive, Mallory and Irvine were now trapped in the death zone, where the human body slowly suffocates, where every step is a battle for survival. If they made it to the summit, the descent would have been even more treacherous. Days passed, no sign of them. The expedition held on to hope, but deep down, they knew Everest does not return those it takes. Rescue was impossible. At that altitude, survival without shelter was measured in hours, and so the British expedition was forced to make a grim decision: to leave them behind and descend without them. Mallory and Irvine had become legends, their bodies lost to the ice, their fate a mystery that haunted mountaineering for generations. But one question refused to die. Did they make it to the top before perishing? They carried a Kodak vest pocket camera, intending to take a photo at the summit. If found, the film could reveal the truth. Experts believe that even after decades, the film could still be developed, but the camera has never been found. Mallory carried a photograph of his wife, promising to leave it on the summit. When his body was discovered 75 years later, the photograph was missing. Did he fulfill his promise? Did he stand on top of the world, even for just a moment, before being swallowed by the mountain? In 1933, an ice axe was found high on Everest, believed to belong to Irvine. It lay below the second step, suggesting a fatal fall. Some believe Irvine slipped, dragging Mallory with him. The evidence suggests a violent fall, rope burns on Mallory's body hinting at a desperate attempt to save each other. Whatever happened that day, Everest did not forgive them. For 75 years, Mallory and Irvine remained missing, their story frozen in time. And then, in 1999, everything changed. The mountain had finally given up one of its ghosts. For 75 years, the bodies of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine remained hidden, lost in Everest's icy grip. The world wondered if they had conquered the summit before meeting their tragic fate. But in 1999, an ambitious search expedition set out to find the answer. Led by renowned mountaineer Eric Simonson, this team was not just another climbing expedition. Their mission was singular: to find Mallory and Irvine, and with them, the truth. This was not an easy task. Everest is a graveyard. Dozens of climbers have perished here, their bodies frozen in time, left where they fell. Identifying Mallory and Irvine among the lost required careful planning and sheer luck. The team narrowed their search to an area near 8,290 meters, below the ridge where Irvine's ice axe was discovered in 1933. If one of them had fallen, this was the most likely place to find their remains. Then, on May 1st, 1999, a climber named Conrad Anker spotted something unusual, a patch of white against the dull brown rocks. They had found a body, a climber from the past. But was it Mallory or Irvine?
You can see the metal caulks, bottom of his boot. That boot, that leg, is angulated fracture, so first guess is that he took a fall. Again, you can see rope around his body. Okay, over on this side you can see his layers, his full sweater, long underwear, cotton.
So you gotta go here. This is here before he started. Thumb split just exactly where mine is.
Okay, these are the collar. Here, wait, this is George Mallory. Really? George Mallory. Oh my God. Oh my God.
The remains were astonishingly well preserved. His clothing, a wool jacket, thick knickers, and hobnail boots, matched the 1924 expedition gear. His hands were outstretched, as if gripping the slope even in death. Then came the undeniable clue, an identification tag embroidered with a name, George Lee Mallory. The legend was no longer just a story. Mallory had returned from the mountain's depths, but his final moments remained a mystery. Mallory's injuries told a tragic tale. His leg was broken in multiple places, suggesting a severe fall. A deep gouge on his forehead hinted at a catastrophic impact, likely from an ice axe striking his skull. The evidence suggested that Mallory had fallen while descending, but from where? And was he alone when he fell? Mallory's wrist still bore the marks of a rope. This hinted at something crucial. He had been tied to Irvine. At some point, the rope had snapped. But then, they discovered something strange. Some things were missing. Among them, Mallory's Kodak camera, the device that could have proven whether they reached the summit. If Mallory had reached the top, his camera would have held the proof. But it was gone. Had it been lost in the fall? Or was it still somewhere up there, waiting to be found? But there was something even more haunting. Mallory had once told his wife he would leave her photograph on the summit. It was not found in his pockets. Did this mean he had fulfilled his promise? Had he reached the top before he fell? Mallory's body was found, but Irvine was still missing, and so was the camera. In 1975, a Chinese climber, Wang Hongbao, claimed to have seen another body on Everest, a second frozen figure wearing old-fashioned clothes, a body that fit the description of Andrew Irvine. But before he could lead anyone to it, Wang died in an avalanche. Irvine's body is still out there somewhere, perhaps still holding the camera, still holding the answer. A century has passed since Mallory and Irvine vanished. Their fate is still debated, but one thing is certain: these men pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. They dared to face the unknown, and in doing so, they became legends. For a century, the question has persisted: did George Mallory and Andrew Irvine reach the summit of Everest before they perished? In 1999, Mallory's body was found, but the answer remained elusive. To this day, the debate continues, fueled by evidence, speculation, and a longing to rewrite history. Mallory and Irvine's final push was a race against time. Armed with primitive oxygen tanks, woolen clothing, and sheer determination, they ascended Everest's treacherous northeast ridge. When last seen by Noel Odell at 12:50 p.m. on June 8, 1924, the pair was making remarkable progress. Odell reported seeing them surmounting what he believed to be the second step, a crucial obstacle on their route. This is where the mystery deepens. The second step is a nearly vertical 30-foot rock face. Today, climbers use an aluminum ladder installed by the Chinese in 1975. But how did Mallory and Irvine, with their rudimentary gear, ascend this sheer wall? Some argue that Mallory, an expert rock climber, could have found a way. If he did, reaching the summit before nightfall was possible. But there were obstacles. Their oxygen equipment was unreliable and prone to leakage. The extreme cold could have frozen the regulators, cutting off their air supply when they needed it most. Could Mallory and Irvine have continued their ascent without supplemental oxygen? Most experts say no. At 8,800 meters, the death zone is merciless. Without oxygen, their bodies would have shut down rapidly. The position of Mallory's body suggests he fell while descending. If they had reached the summit, why was he still so high on the mountain so late in the day? The greatest hope for an answer lies in a missing camera. If recovered and developed, the photographs could confirm whether they stood on the summit before their fall. Search teams have scoured Everest for decades, hoping to find Irvine's body and, with it, the camera. In 2019, a high-tech drone survey identified unusual shapes beneath the ice, raising new hopes that Irvine's remains might yet be found. Whether they reached the summit or not, Mallory and Irvine's legacy is undeniable. They inspired generations of climbers, pushing the limits of what was believed possible. In 1953, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay became the first confirmed climbers to reach Everest's peak. But even Hillary himself acknowledged that Mallory and Irvine's attempt was extraordinary. The mountain has yet to reveal all its secrets. Until Irvine's body or the lost camera is found, the fate of Mallory and Irvine remains one of the greatest mysteries in the history of exploration. Did they stand atop the world before their fall? Or did Everest deny them, as it has denied so many? Perhaps one day we will know. Until then, the legend endures. Nearly a century has passed since George Mallory and Andrew Irvine vanished into Everest's icy abyss. Yet, their story remains unfinished. In the decades since Mallory's body was discovered in 1999, the hunt for his lost climbing partner and the ultimate proof of their fate has not ceased. While Mallory's remains provided clues, the greatest unanswered question lies with Andrew Irvine. If found, his body may hold the key to the mystery, especially if he still carries their Kodak vest pocket camera, which could contain photographic proof of their ascent. But where is Irvine? His body has eluded discovery, even as countless climbers have scoured the mountain. There are reports from Chinese climbers who claim to have seen a second body in the 1970s, higher up than where Mallory was found. Some believe it was Irvine. If we could locate that body, it might change everything. In recent years, new technology has reignited the search. In 2019, a high-tech drone survey pinpointed unusual shapes buried beneath Everest's ice. Could Irvine be among them? But Everest does not give up its dead so easily. Bodies shift with the glaciers, vanish beneath fresh snowfall, and sometimes are never seen again. Every attempt to find Irvine is a battle against nature itself. Even today, Everest remains as deadly as it was in 1924. For those searching, the risks are no different than they were for Mallory and Irvine, a brutal test of endurance, willpower, and fate. Yet, the search continues, because some mysteries are too great to abandon. The legacy of Mallory and Irvine is more than just a mystery. They were pioneers who dared to challenge the impossible, laying the foundation for every climber who followed in their footsteps. For some, the answer doesn't matter. What matters is that they tried. They stood on Everest slopes, looked up at the impossible, and climbed into legend. Somewhere beneath the ice, the final clue may still be waiting. Maybe one day, the mountain will surrender its last secret. Until then, the question remains,